Hi, everybody. This is Alan Peoples with Patricia Awyan Lehman, another Metaphysical Egypt. Today we have a special guest, Steve Kallman, and we're talking all about Saqqara.
And I was so excited to meet Steve, basically through him writing to me and telling me about this wonderful book that he had written. And he even sent me a copy, and I was so pleased. And it's called The Secret Code of the Step Pyramid of Djeser, or Djeser, as we say locally, at Saqqara. Incredible book. And we'll show a picture of it at the end, and I'll put where you can get it in the comments. But this book is fantastic. And I was, Steve was asking me if he could use a picture of Hakim that we had on our website. So I learned about how he met Hakim, and of course he worked with Jean-Philippe Lauer, who, was famous for, working at Saqqara for many, many years. So I'm going to stop now and let Steve tell us a little bit about himself, and then we have loads of pictures and things we want to talk about, because Steve has studied this site more than anyone else I know, and I never met Jean-Philippe. So Steve is my hero for so much knowledge about Saqqara, things that I've been talking about, but you bring so much more to the table. And it's such an exciting book, and I cannot encourage people enough to get out and get themselves a copy of it if you're interested in, wow, so many different things about ancient Egypt. I mean, the site itself embodies so many different aspects of, Egypt and what it represents. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my background initially, when I went to college, was I was a music major, majored in music composition, minored in percussion, for what it's worth. But while I was in college, I worked at the college bookstore, and I got even more interested in ancient Egypt because my boss was actually a member of the Theosophical Society. So there's a lot of things that I learned even just working at the bookstore, and it produced a real innate desire to go to Egypt, which I did in 1988 and 1990. And in 1990, I had a free day to go to Saqqara or to the Giza pyramids. Well, most of our tour group went to see the Great Pyramid again and all that stuff. So I chose Saqqara. I was wandering around the enclosure, which is like 37 acres. But I stumbled onto a piece of stonework in the ground in roughly the northeast section of the enclosure. And at first I thought it was the ear of a statue. And I dug it out, and it's just this oval piece of stonework. And I photographed it and its environment, and I covered it back up and kept on going. But it wasn't until the end of 1990, when I was just going through my photographs. In fact, this is the stone, if you want to transfer over. So I'm looking at this doorpost socket, not knowing that it was an unusually shaped one, but there are other doorpost sockets in stone throughout like the Heb Sed court, for example, that are semicircular. This is oval shaped, as you can tell in the left photograph. It's unusual, but it's actually, considering the time period in which it was made, it's a rather remarkable piece of sculpting, in my opinion. But I'm looking at this picture, and I just wondered, what in the world is this thing meant to be? And it dawned on me that it was for a self-closing door. And it's like a saloon door, where you go through a pair of swinging doors, and they just close on their own. And like I was mentioning before, it came as a result of having to fix a pair of doors at the college bookstore where I worked. And I saw the same similarity, and it just blew my mind. But then the next thing came to me is that, why is there a self-closing door in a place where there was no exit. Then the wheels started to turn. And I'm studying the plans of the step pyramid enclosure, and there's no way in the world. And there's a small set of rooms nearby there, but why have a self-closing door there? I mean, a regular door would be fine if you wanted one. Most of the other ersatz doors throughout are stone. They're in place. They're just facsimiles of a door. They're not meant to open or close. But this one didn't have any similar type of stone door or any type of indication of being anything but an actual working doorpost socket. So one thing led to another, and I was looking at the plans of the enclosure itself. And I'm looking at, I don't know if you could bring that up, Patricia. Yeah, that one. And if you notice, there are 14 false gates around the perimeter plus the south entrance gate. Now, 14 is a significant number. It's relating to death and resurrection, which is significant because this is meant to be a mortuary temple.
Also has to do with the stages of the moon, waxing and waning.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And you see the red arrow there. That's where the doorpost socket is. And I'm looking at the outline of the enclosure wall, and they're mostly evenly spaced. The false gates are evenly spaced, except for the south wall, which is to the left, and the east wall, which is the wall where the south entrance gate is. So you have 3 fairly evenly spaced gates plus a single gate in the middle of nowhere for all practical purposes. So I'm thinking about this more and more, and it came to realize in reading the works of Jean-Philippe Lauer and the other team members that there were at least 5, maybe 6 stages of construction and destruction and reconstruction before the final step pyramid enclosure as it now exists. So I'm thinking that if this was meant to be an exit, then at some point the original first enclosure was a smaller version of this. And so the where the red arrow is, you'll see right below it is false gate 13. That I thought was a true exit for the first enclosure, and what is false gate 14 was the original entrance. And then more and more things became obvious as when you start from the small mastabas that were there, which are mastaba 1, 2, and 3, and then subsequently a 4-tier pyramid was built over that, and then the 6-tier pyramid that exists nowadays was expanded even further. So there's a lot of work going on here, and it was imperative for me, at least, to figure out the chain of events that led to its current its current size and how it was developed. And it's kind of like a hobby of mine. I like looking at architectural plans. In fact, one of my favorite architects is Frank Lloyd Wright, and trying to understand how things are designed, how things are built. I kept stumbling onto this one idea after another. And I got to admit, it was an interesting journey, that's for sure.
I have to ask Steve if you think the site is as old or older. Some people think it's more modern, and some people think it's older than they say it is, which is about 650 BC, 27.
Oh,
yeah,
considerably older than that.
Yes.
The step pyramid, the 6-tier step pyramid, has been dated to 2663 BC.
Yes.
Roughly, because of some wood samples they took and did a carbon-14 analysis.
So
But
yeah, it
I
would
think,
definitely much older. But yeah, we think it could be even much older than that, especially with all
well, based on if you see in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3. Those are
yes,
called massifs or storage magazines.
yes.
At the very least, Massif 2, the center one, existed prior to Djoser and Imhotep building their mortuary temples. It's been dated to the Second Dynasty, which is about 400 years earlier, but they're not sure because they've never really gotten it into it. It's too dangerous to go down there. They have to shore it up and actually do some decent excavations there. So it's a lot older than that. And the interesting thing, if you go into the central burial chamber and you see the sarcophagus there,
Yes.
it's bigger than a sarcophagi in the Serapeum, which are supposedly the biggest ones in Egypt. But this one is
Bigger,
even
yeah.
bigger than that.
Uh-huh.
But it's constructed totally differently than any other sarcophagus. It's made of 32 blocks of granite, kind of like one of those furniture kits you get in tab A, slot B, and it's weird because as big as it is, it makes sense to construct it out of 32 separate blocks. But how did they get it in there? And some of the other details that surround this sarcophagus are very interesting if you start to think about these things like I did. For example, there's something called the North Descending Passage, which is blocked off now because originally, when it was a 4-tier pyramid, it exited out to the surface. And that was covered up, and another one was created, which you can get into now.
Right.
The thing about it is that it's the only ascending or descending passage into a tomb that's literally 7 meters or 28 feet or so above the floor. Which makes you wonder is, why did Imhotep decide to do it the hard way? Like dig this entire shaft and put the north descending passage 7 meters above the floor. More importantly, the sarcophagus itself sits on 24 pillars of stacked stones,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of nuts when you think about it. One good earthquake and the whole thing goes over like that. So I kept scratching my head and I'm thinking, well, this is crazy. And the other thing is, whoever assembled it did it backwards. There is a stone plug on the north end of the sarcophagus, but the instructions are written on the side of it. It's supposed to be on the south side of the sarcophagus. So the whole sarcophagus is turned 180 degrees different than the instructions that are written on the side. If you look
Another
at
head scratcher. Yep.
yeah, and you
Patricia,
think,
what do you think of that?
well, I don't think Imhotep built it
I was
because
just going to say that. You beat me to it. We don't think he built it either.
because he was so careful about this. When you look at this map or plan, everything is laid out in a logical fashion. And you say, okay, he's supervising and his construction managers are building things that it's obvious that the instructions are written on there. He would not have, he would probably have told his construction manager, tear it down, turn it around and rebuild it. But no, that leads me to consider the possibility that it was already in place when he went down there and took a look at this
Exactly.
mastaba, which is just a flat structure. And more importantly, when they first dug up or first got into the central burial chamber, there was a mass of stones around it. Colin or Cyril Firth, anyway, the the team who were excavating it with Jean-Philippe Lauer thought that it was flush with the floor. It was some kind of sarcophagus that was set into a floor, and that the stones around it was just part of it, and that the granite blocks that formed the top of the sarcophagus, it was just to cover it up. But it turns out there was more going on there. So I think the way it was found and photographed in the 1920s and early 30s, with the stones around the sarcophagus, is how Imhotep himself found that burial chamber. And the original Egyptologist, a fellow by the name of Paring, got in there, and he surmised that Djoser was never buried there. And Firth had to concede that that's a possibility, because one of the blocks was tilted backwards, and so that you could peek inside. When they first did the excavation work in the 20s, it was already there, so they felt like, oh, tomb robbers got in there and stole the body, but you couldn't pull a body out that was in there. So the size of the interior of this thing meant that a person up to 14 feet tall could be buried in there, but that's not likely to have happened. One of the things that the historian Manetho said that I think it was Kasekemwe, the predecessor of Djoser, was about like 5 meters or 5 cubits tall, which is about like 9 feet.
That's right.
And so if he had a form of gigantism, that would explain the need for a large sarcophagus. But if you look at Kasekemwe's statues, he's normal sized. I mean,
well, they did create the statues to be the perfect, like, human, up until
that's true.
Theorized that these boxes were never meant for human beings, that they were used for, some people say for energetic reasons. You have the power plant theory and what part it might have played in that. Others that, there's so many different theories about what it could have been used for, and then reused later for bodies, some of the pyramids. But the major pyramids, they didn't find bodies in these boxes. And some of them they found that were totally, the lids were still on, and they had not been, damaged by tomb raiders, and nothing was in some of those boxes. We don't know for sure.
Yeah, there's a fellow in Britain, I think. He surmised that the sarcophagus in the South Pyramid, South Tomb, and the one in the Step Pyramid, the one in the South Tomb is about half the size. Mm-hmm. He thinks that they were used to generate methane, but that seems kind of weird. Considering that it's not a solid box, whatever you put in it to generate or create methane would leak out.
Yep.
And the stone plug would pull out and get you. And he says, no, there's something else going on here. And I haven't figured it out.
On that. I do think that there is another reason for it. And again, reused at different time periods for different purposes.
Yeah. So there's a lot in the Step Pyramid enclosure that Imhotep inherited.
Yeah.
He didn't build it. And that's part of the mystery, is what was there, what did he incorporate? And I think I've got a handle on a lot of it. Especially the two pavilions, the South and the North Pavilion.
Mm-hmm.
Those, I think, were mastabas that were part of this whole field of unused or unfinished burial facilities. And the thing is, supposedly Djoser only reigned about 19 years. Some say 29, depending on the source.
Yes.
But to build everything in a space of even 29 years to me, even back then with their skill, they wouldn't have finished. Some of it was unfinished, like the North Mortuary Temple was unfinished. But just the scope and the scale and the quantity of buildings in this enclosure, just some of it had to pre-exist construction of Djoser's Mortuary Temple.
We agree with you on that. And yeah, of course, they date the entire site back to early dynastic times. But yeah, very likely pre-dynastic times.
Yeah.
And we see this at, almost all the sites. We see structures below structures below structures. That it's the site that's important for energetic reasons, earth currents, water, these kind of things. And then they constantly build on that same spot because of the energetics, because they're making use of it. They're harnessing the energy of the earth at that particular area to create these structures that are, again, embodying all these secrets and capabilities of interacting with us, I believe.
Well, the pyramid or the enclosure itself has a great deal of resonance with sound and music, and even Hakim said the Heb Sed court was used as a hospital.
Yep.
And I didn't realize at the time when I was doing this, yeah, sure, that's nice, whatever. Yeah. But there are things that just fell into place that made sense. First off, buildings that were used for the Heb Sed ritual, which is a ritual where the pharaoh would run around a course and to basically announce to the world that he was still capable of ruling. And those buildings that were associated with this ritual were usually temporary, made out of papyrus stalks or wood or something. And the thing was, the Heb Sed court is made of stone. So it's very likely that it was used for something more than just the Heb Sed festival.
It wasn't just Hakim that said that it was used as a healing facility. There was, and I don't know the name, unfortunately. It was a student that I met of an Egyptian Egyptologist that she studied with, and he said the exact same thing, unrelated to Hakim. But no, go ahead. I'm sorry. It just makes so much sense. And, we've been working at the site, and, what the Heb Sed really represents is bringing everything back into balance. It's the uniting of Upper and Lower Egypt. That can be related to the two hemispheres of the brain. It's all about restoring Ma'at, right? Within the body, which is health. When you're removing all the blockages to your inner flow, you're restoring health, the breath of life. But it's the same thing, if you're bringing the two hemispheres of the brain together, you're creating this harmonic resonance, which is all about what the Heb Sed represented. This whole idea that the king dies and is brought back to life. He has this moment of complete bliss and oneness. And then he comes back and he gets crowned a Horus king. He is basically representing the power of God on earth. And he gets crowned with the double crown on a throne. So, yeah, it does make sense on so many levels.
Yeah. And part of this journey is looking at a plan of the south entrance hallway passage.
Yeah, I'll go back. Can you still see my slides?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'll get us back to that because that's where I started everything.
Do you want to actually go through the presentation that you have prepared there, Patricia?
Well, it's everything that Steve wants to talk about, so we can easily do that. We get caught on tangents because there's so much to talk about.
Yeah, I know. It's just, there's so much interesting stuff that you're flipping through, very back and forth.
Exactly. So we do want to start. Let's start it. Here also, I wanted to show them. Here is the other door, the door jammer. The doorpost socket that you had been talking about.
Right. you
With
notice,
the
if you
system.
look at, yeah, the image on the right is where the doorpost socket is located, and it leads into the door. A swinging door would move, allow you to go into that room there, which I believe is a momisi or a birthing center. And I added the door. That's
Yeah, of
part
course.
of it. And the doorpost socket that's on the left image is one that's in one of the chapel number 4 at in the Heb Sed court, the West Chapel. You can
Yes.
see that the sides are perpendicular to the ground, perpendicular to the floor of the doorpost socket itself. Whereas the one I discovered was oval shaped and meant for a self-closing door.
Yeah.
But moving forward, the proof of it, the Heb Sed court being used as a healing center came from looking at the entrance hall and a plan of it. And I felt that somewhere in the 24 bones.
Steve, let's go through the presentation because I have pictures for all of these things.
Oh,
So
okay.
that'll make it easier for us
Sure.
to have a discussion.
Go ahead.
So this is quickly, I did want to point out that you met Jean-Philippe and are very familiar with his work, which I think is so fascinating. And then we've talked about Imhotep, and I wanted to introduce the audience to, a representation of him and what he represents, who is just, and I've heard you talk about him. It's amazing. You call him a polymath. And yeah, to me, he understood the energetics of architecture and the physical body. He's known as the great physician and the architect. His name itself is Imhotep. You can see the hieroglyphics, and Hakim said it means he who comes or walks in peace, which is again restoring harmonic resonance.
Right, exactly.
And there's Asclepius on the far right, just to point out that, they deify Imhotep in Egypt eventually because of how profound his work was. And then he becomes, basically a netter or a person in Greece that becomes a god, which is Asclepius, who also taught very similar things.
Yes, exactly.
But let's go forward. We talked about that and the door sockets. And here is our south entrance.
Can I just ask you a question, though, about the door?
Sure.
Yeah.
What's the point of having a self-closing door here?
Exactly. That was the question that kept popping up in my mind. The only thing I thought of is that at one time it led out, this particular area led out of the enclosure, but the first enclosure, and that is the important thing to remember, is that there were 4, 5, or 6 different building phases that went on here. And the initial building phase was a smaller enclosure. I don't know if I sent you a picture of that, Patricia.
I have it toward the end. Yeah, we'll get to that.
Okay. So
I followed how you placed everything in the book because I wasn't quite sure where the conversation would go.
That's okay. So it's very unique. It's quite different than any door to a temple or structure in ancient Egypt. They all looked like this picture here on the left with the red arrow. Those doorposts with real closing door in temples look like what you see there on the left image. This one is probably the only one in all of Egypt that is meant for a self-closing door. And it's a head scratcher. And that's why I spent a couple of years just looking at this thing. I didn't understand it until everything came to kind of like a one-shot deal. And then it just kept expanding and tying in with the fact that the Heb Sed court was a hospital, a medical center at one point, and things started to make a lot more sense after a while. So if you want to continue, Patricia.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Wait, so why a self-closing door?
I'll tell you what, I'll tell you that when we get done with Patricia's presentation.
Okay. All right.
Some mysteries have to wait.
Sorry, I like to jump to the end.
I know. So here we have the south entrance, which is really still impressive, even in its quite dilapidated or ruined state. But they did a marvelous job rebuilding this much since the 1920s.
Yeah, it's incredible. I wanted to show them, give them an idea of where these things are that we're talking about. And this picture was great for that. So the south entrance is the lower, you can see the arrow pointing. What I just showed you is where the arrow is pointing. And the Heb Sed court is right above it. So that gives you an idea of where these things are.
Mm-hmm.
And going in the south entrance, you walk through this, what we've talked about before, the field of reeds.
Yeah. Well, I've been calling it a field of reeds for years before I read your book. And I've been seeing, and I've talked about it, and Alan will tell you about it being the spine and the 42 divisions being these, the gnomes, and, the openings, they might have had the offerings. And, we've gone into so many discussions. And then I read your book, and it really it unlocked some ideas in my mind about how the spinal column works. So I'm going to let you tell us about it.
Okay. This image on the right is a reversed color image of the south entrance hall. I don't know if you have the other.
I do.
You do.
Well, here are the gnomes, the 42 gnomes, where there's also the 42 judges of Ma'at. But I have a few extra pictures to give them an idea. This is looking down at that entrance. Mm-hmm. And then I have, is this the one you wanted?
Yep. Yeah. If you look, this is a part of the plan of the step pyramid enclosure. It, it's just a hall of columns. Okay. But if you reverse the white to the black and the black to the white, you get what looks like a spine. Now, the human spine has some little bones going off to the side, some of which are used to attach to the ribs, and the rest are just little protrusions until you get down to L5, which is the first of the spinal bones. Now, there are 24 of them, and there's only 22 sets of columns. And I thought, well, I knew there was a spine represented in this. But then a friend of mine who's a nurse said, well, if you look at a skeleton, at the thoracic vertebra number 3 is where the arms attach to the spine, and at lumbar vertebra 5 is where the legs attach to it. So Imhotep is saying that using a formula of the space between the columns equals bones of the spine, except for T3 and L5, which are different in that the bones of the extremities, the legs and arms, are attached. So that's why it looks, there's hidden in plain sight that there's all 24 vertebrae are represented in the spaces, except for those two bones that are used for attaching the arms and legs. So that's what's going on here. And if you, Patricia, if you go back to that other slide,
there we go.
Yeah, right there. And it all lines up.
Yep.
This is the exit vestibule at the very top is analogous to the skull, and then of course you have all your vertebrae lining up perfectly. The sacrum is, as you can see, kind of trapezoidal shaped, as is the entrance vestibule with the two permanently open doors, and the coccyx is the tailbone, and that's the entrance hallway. It's long, narrow entranceway that gets in there. So it's can't be a coincidence after a while. If you think it is, then you have to remember who designed this. He was allegedly a physician, although supposedly there's no proof that it was. But we know that he built this thing. So he had to have been a physician, because only a physician who's also an architect could have built this entire funerary complex.
Yep.
And that guy is Imhotep.
And we've touched very often on this concept of looking at the negative space in between things, which is really interesting because it's like it suggests an interconnectivity between the form and the formless.
100%. Well done.
Right. The interesting thing
about
is
that all the time. The Egyptians made use of the space in between the forms in a lot of their depictions, in their structures. It's amazing that they seem to have this, fourth or fifth dimensional ability to see and feel, to create things that we noticed even within temple structure that we won't talk about now. But yeah, it's really phenomenal. And I love that you said that, Alan, that they sort of believe that there is the form and the formless, but they're one and the same thing.
Well, also in a way, you are following the path of the Kundalini energy up the spine, but you're walking in the bones, in the nerves. You're connected to.
Literally, you're going up the spinal column, and you're going through the Sea of Reeds, which relates to the story of Moses. There's a story of Horus in the waters in the Nile. Being pushed through the reeds in a basket. And at the end, I have a picture here. You can actually see the cobras on the southern tomb.
And it really makes me think of Catholics in church following the Stations of the Cross, and you kind of meditate.
Yes.
Each one of these steps as you go higher and higher, and you even have your rosary beads where you.
And there's 14 of them.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Symbolizing death and resurrection, and the Stations of the Cross.
Exactly.
So that whole thing came. So it after a while, the word coincidence fails to answer any questions.
There's no coincidences, just patterns.
Yes.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So in Egyptian religious thought, it is thought that the number 42 represents the gods. And here we have 42 assessors or gods who greet the newly deceased person, and it goes through a judgment ritual before he's allowed to enter the field of reeds or Sekhet or Aru, whatever, how you pronounce it. But the thing is, the depictions of the Jed pillar, which is supposedly the spine of Ptah, the creator of the universe, the physical universe. That is, I have it on my monitor here if you want to share that.
I do have a picture of that here too.
Oh, you do? Okay. So interesting thing.
When we get to the Heb Sed court, I talk about the Heb Sed festival and the raising of the Jed being part of that experience.
Okay.
That the pharaohs went through, restoring mind. Of course, and the funny thing with this scene, this judgment scene, and you have these 42 judges or assessors. That judgment scene, Hakim would have said the way it was told was a game of the priests, because they start to tell stories and not the truth. But we're actually looking at they're weighing of the heart. The feather represented the mind. So it's sort of like the heart and the mind, or the left brain focus and right brain focus. And you're bringing that into balance, almost sort of like they're doing it here. um, restoring Ma'at. So there are so many ways to look at this scene. And, you know, that thing of weighing your heart against a feather, you know, the idea of being lighthearted, you know, and that's what carries you up to heaven, right? You're not carrying around all those, you know, the guilt from everything that you've done in your past. So many different ways to look at it.
And that ties into the red crown and the white crown.
Exactly.
Which is a joining of the heart with the white crown, with the head, which is the red crown. And Pharaoh, who is an embodiment of this divine energy, has attained he becomes a realized man, which is part of the ancient history going back 30,000 years to a group of people called the Shemsu Hor.
Hakim said it was a mispronunciation. He said it was Seshu Hor, which relates to Seshet, which is interesting because she was sacred geometry and architecture and, you know, that total balance of energy. But yeah, same thought, the followers of Horus being this Shemsu or Seshu Hor.
So the number 42 is quite interesting. If you look at a picture of the Jed pillar, the more stylized ones have 4 rings with 2 feathers at the top. So that if the rings are 10, so you have 40 and 2. The Jed pillar is supposedly the structural support for the entire universe, being the spine of Ptah. Going back to the entrance hall, you have 42 columns and 22 spaces, and 2 of the columns representing the human spine. So if you look at your hand and say this is, your fingers are either 10 or the number 1, your thumb is either number 2 or 20. So we have 42 and 24. So in the Bible it says God, or in this case in Egypt, the gods created man in his image. So mirror image. There's a lot of mirror image things going on in this entrance hall, which we can get into if you want to explore that further.
Oh, it's incredible.
Yeah.
We may have to divide this up into 2 because we have so much to talk about.
Yeah. My wife was saying, you should bring out 2 books. There's got so much in there. I know. That's all I know.
Well, you
but,
do.
No,
it's
I know.
So much information.
I know. It's that's really kind of it was a challenge, but it was fun.
Oh, I can
Nonetheless. So what do we have coming up next, Patricia?
Okay, so we've done this. I had this picture in as well. I mean, like you say, it's unmistakable that this represents the spine and all its beauty. And that is humanity. I mean, we talk about, you know, Schwaller de Leeuwit's Temple of Man. These structures were all built with this same design in some way, shape, or form. I also see the temples laid out in the Sima Tawi format. You know, you've got your left side and your right side in this breath of life going back and forth. That's Kundalini rising as well.
Which temple was that?
All of them. And you can really see it at Karnak because they have the columns of the lotus and the papyrus right before you enter the Holy of Holies. So it's showing you this is the breath of life, this pathway. This is the Kundalini. And that's what's aligned to the rising sun at the winter solstice, which represents, you know, this moment, this Heb Sed, you know, the culmination of the Heb Sed, you know, the Pharaoh dying, becoming one with all that is. If you've ever had a near-death experience, you have that moment of complete bliss, perfect balance and harmony, and then you come back, you know, and they have the opening of the mouth ceremony, and they bring the Pharaoh back, and he becomes a god on earth. He's brought the power of the Neteru, the forces of nature, down to earth.
Yeah,
and
it's also important to realize that when a pharaoh died, they would announce his death as the falcon has flown to the west.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go in the entrance of the south entrance hall and then go through it, you are actually going from east to west.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some research done of near-death experiences, it's been discovered or observed that when a soul leaves the body, it leaves through the top of the head, which you become a proxy for the soul when you walk through the head entrance hall out to the great through the exit vestibule and out into the Great South Court.
Well, that's kind of like what we talked about before. It's the symbolism of the rabbit going into the hole, right? Leaving the forest field through the opening at the top or the bottom, as it were.
That's the rabbit hole, is going through the center of the torus.
Right.
Can I ask you guys, so we have this structure with the columns representing the spinal column, obviously. What was the purpose of walking through it? And then once you got to the end, what happens? What happens when you get to the place of the skull? Because you're not walking directly towards the step pyramid. You're actually walking away from the Heb Sed festival. So why is this where it is, and where is it going, and what is it for?
Nobody can say for sure, but I did read a paper, and unfortunately I cannot find it. It was several years ago. And it's something that I had been thinking about, is it might have been part of the ceremony of the Heb Sed, wherein in those spaces in between the columns, they could have had offering tables, and I'm talking way back, early dynastic, pre-dynastic times. But they celebrated this Koyak festival where, and we've talked about that, Alan, where they made the bread cakes out of the wheat, barley, and corn that they planted in the coffins that they filled with the silt from the overflowing Nile, right? So they used right. And every single gnome made their own bread cakes, and they made barley beer or wine, and this was the first communion, right? They were having communion with the body of Osiris, or whatever name of the netter that it is that was embodying the earth, us. This is Osiris. He is us in a three-dimensional reality. So they could have been the pharaoh could have been taking, or the king could have been taking the bread and the wine at each stop of every gnome. Therefore, he's putting the body of Osiris, or the earth, back together again.
You're right. He's recreating the ritual of reassembling the body of Osiris, just as Isis did.
Exactly. One possibility, but it could have been some sort of ritual that, because they performed many rituals within this Heb Sed. He got bathed in all different kinds of oils. We've talked about it many times that they're still celebrating these jubilees, these Heb Sed festivals today, and the royalty celebrates this. The Queen of England celebrated it several times, and the King will now. And this is what happens through this blood. I don't want to talk about bloodlines or anything like that, but this goes way back to ancient Egypt. I think it all has to do with death and resurrection, rebirth. All of this has to do with what happens to us. How we constantly move through these cycles and cycles within cycles, and it's the breath of life.
Exactly. I think, if to answer your question, Alan, I kind of put the mystery aside for a second. I think it goes back. The reason for the exit gate goes back to the original design of the first enclosure. It is, you follow a certain circuit. Okay, you enter the enclosure, so you're going from the world of the flesh outside to the world of the spirit inside. It's a metaphor. The entire interior part of the enclosure is meant to mimic or imitate the afterlife. So going through the entrance hall, you are leaving the physical world into the spiritual world, and then following the course through the Great South Court, and finally winding up where the self-closing door is, where there was a actual gate at one time, I believe, and then you exit there back into the world of the flesh. It's kind of like an imitation of the reincarnation cycle.
So you're tracing the journey of Horus through the night cycle, through the underworld.
That's one possibility, or just the journey of the soul.
Yeah, through form and formless perceptions of reality.
Right.
You know,
That's
the flesh.
that, I think that's what I think the main symbolism for a self-closing door means. It's like you cannot enter the same way you left the world of the spirit. You have to go through the death process through the south entrance gate.
There you go. Interesting.
So this is a top view of the spine, and that these transverse processes are those little bones that stick out, some of which are attached to the ribs. Most of them are freestanding, or they're just there. But that's what the empty space between the columns represents, is the transverse processes. So the presumption of Egyptologists was that Imhotep wasn't quite sure of creating standalone columns, which is kind of nuts. But when you see it in this context, it was deliberate in order to impart this piece of spiritual and metaphysical wisdom. And the thing is, the columns themselves are imitations of bundles of reeds, which were used as columns in homes and other structures, and are very, very strong. So there's no problem in using stone versions of these reed bundles to support a roof. If you go through the exit vestibule, which is that square room with 4 freestanding columns, that argument kind of falls by the wayside, because he did obviously create columns that were freestanding. And he could have done it here, but he chose not to for a very metaphysical reason.
I just had some pictures showing this idea of Kundalini. But yeah, it's nice. I'm glad you pointed out that these columns are bundles of reeds, because we didn't say that before.
Yeah.
I love also that you pointed out where the heart was, which was just perfect.
Yeah, this is a small chamber that is on the north side of the entrance hall. I think they've bricked it up lately. I've seen pictures where they just closed it off. For what reason, I don't know. I'm hoping at some point they'll just open it back up and recreate this chamber, because it actually is metaphysically and metaphorically important.
Exactly.
Because it symbolizes the heart, and the H is actually kind of cute. It's Jean-Philippe Lauer is the one who put all the letters and numbers and all throughout the plan, and I just replicated it. And it's the heart chamber. There's other coincidences that are kind of strange. It's really strange. But anyway, this also represents the city of Memphis, or when it was known back then as Nebuchadnezzar, was the capital of Egypt at that time. So you see here on the column that's just to the left of the H chamber is L1, which is the first nome of Lower Egypt, and then the one opposite it is the second nome, etc. So there are 22 columns representing Upper Egypt, and then 20 columns representing Lower Egypt, and that's no accident. And here at nome L1, Lower Egypt number 1, is the capital city of Egypt, which is, when you think about it, Memphis is also the heart of Egypt. Capital cities are always the heart of a country. So it's the heart chamber for the physical body, and it's also the heart center for the country. And then this is also, if you notice, if you look at a map of Egypt, you'll notice that the city of modern day Mitrahina, or Memphis, it's on the left or south or the east, the west bank of the Nile River, and this shows like it would be on the east bank. But here again, we have another mirror image.
Yeah.
We have We have the Nile River and then the Delta here. And then this is the capital city of Memphis on the west bank. But the entrance hall, the hallway with the 4 columns of the exit vestibule with the heart chamber on the right side.
And it should
So
be
another mirror image of a symbolic concept built into. Think about this. Just incredible genius. It's got all sorts of layers going on, and it all fits. And it's just so astounded at just how much thought went into building this temple complex. I'm still stunned.
Well, we're stunned because we are coming from a left brain focus, and I think they were coming from a right brain, intuitive, unity consciousness. They had the ability to create in perfection because they were connected, and we just think differently than they did. So to us, it's like, wow. To them, it's like, well, what other way would we have done it? Maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah, what you think of as the hard way was actually the easy way.
Well, yeah, exactly. Who would have thought? I like to point out these corbelled ceilings. I've shown a few, and the corbelled ceilings is a way to bring sound back into the structure. So this is just a hint. Of course, the whole hallway was in a state of destruction. The roof that we're seeing overhead is modern to protect it, but it would have been covered, and you would have seen more of this corbelling. So these would have been incredible. This hall would have been incredibly resonant.
So here we have the brain being represented in the exit vestibule. We have 4 columns, and it divided into 2 parts with the center hemisphere divide. And you have the frontal, each lobe is represented by one part of the column. So you have basically temporal, frontal, parietal, and occipital lobe, and it duplicated on the other side of the brain. So you got 8 different lobes represented by the 8 hemispheric columns. And then going further is the bones of the skull are represented in the space. I don't know if I sent you a display of that.
I don't think so. I think that was all you sent me. And I the images of the brain there because you have it in the book, and I found images that were similar because I just thought it was great to see.
Okay. Let me get that.
Here you actually see this exit looking from the other way, going toward the other direction.
Right. Let's see here. I have it.
Do you want me to switch to you?
Let me do this. Okay. Yeah, I have an image on my second monitor. If you want to switch to it. Oh, yeah, there you go. So the bones are represented in this particular image, and you got the nasal bones are at the top, and then the jawbone or the mandible is at the bottom, and then you got a frontal bone, which is number 2, and then an occipital bone, which is in the back of your head, and then the other parts of the structure. And let's see, here's what they look like. You have the frontal bone, which is kind of analogous to even parts of the brain. So you have the nasal bones, the jawbone. An interesting thing is, if you look at the plan of the entrance hall, it's basically you're looking at a person from the front. Their heart, or in this case, the heart chamber, is on the person's left side, and you're looking at a person looking up, like in prayer or supplication to the gods or whatever. So the nasal bone is at the top, okay, and his jawbone is at the bottom. So it's kind of interesting in that respect. So you can see this, but this is the always open door. I'm going through my slides here, and this is what it looks like for the nasal bone. But it's kind of interesting. Then see how the nasal bones line up with the doorway that exits into. I thought I know it's kind of cute. I'll admit it. But you look at it and it's really kind of, what? Is this a coincidence or isn't it? You be the judge.
Love it.
That's it's crazy, but you know, that's what's going on here. I get astounded. I just keep coming up with these ideas. I'm just wondering, how much am I channeling Imhotep, or am I just really talking out of the top of my head?
Well, this is what happens when you're so passionate about this, and you know, I find myself doing the same thing, and it's like, but there's this and this, and then Alan says, "Wait a minute, you might have gone a bit too far."
Drift back to reality land here.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, anything's possible, because they were seeing, I think, multidimensionally, where you know we are limited. Our senses limit us.
Yeah.
So anything's possible.
Yeah. Even Hakim said instead of having 7 chakras, we have actually 360 chakras.
360 senses. Yes.
Senses. Okay. Yeah. Whatever that is. Who knows? But I also wanted to show one other thing regarding the are you going to present the DNA being okay?
The DNA. Wait a minute. I have the mitosis. I don't have the DNA.
Oh, okay. I can bring that up briefly. Oh, one other thing I wanted to show is that the whole mythology behind going into the afterlife is represented by different sections of the entrance hall. At the bottom, we have the gates of the Amduat leading into the entrance hall. And you notice one thing, this I got from John Anthony West, that there you have 2 doors in the entrance vestibule right here. And then there's a single door here.
Yes.
Metaphorically, you're leaving the world of duality and entering the world of the singularity of the void.
Exactly. Yes.
And so going further up, you got your 42 assessors in the Hall of Judgment, and at the very end, you have the 8 gods of the weighing of the heart ceremony.
I love it.
I know it's a bit strange, but it's all there. Imhotep didn't leave anything out.
I'm not the least bit surprised. You know, I put that in there, the judgment, thinking, Steve's going to think I'm nuts, and there it is.
Nope, it's not crazy. And here's what is represented. You're looking at the left side and right side of the body. The female is the left and the male is the right. So here, the first god you encounter is Anubis, who leads you through, and then Ma'at, who guides you. And then Thoth is over here. He weighs your heart, or he records the proceedings. And then number 4 is Amit, the crocodile, hippopotamus, lion.
Yeah, the monster.
Waiting for a good snack. And then Horus is leading you to the dais where Osiris is sitting with Isis and Nephthys. So all of the 8 primary gods of the ritual are represented in this exit vestibule, which is another layer on top of everything else.
No, it's beautiful, and this is exactly what I see. You know, here, and all these structures are embodying all this ancient knowledge. These are the halls of records.
Mm-hmm. This particular temple complex is unique in that there was one architect designing the entire thing with little or no additions made by subsequent generations of pharaohs. You go to Karnak and you've got, different pharaohs adding on to that whole temple complex. So you can lose the original design concept when you're looking at these other older temples, or even some temples after this. This is the only one that I know of where nothing really changed. You go to the Temple of Luxor, you got 3 or 4 pharaohs adding on to that. Maybe the Ramesseum is only a single architect who designed it for Ramses II. But this was the first major monumental mortuary temple in Egypt, and I keep shaking my head. It's such a wealth of things. It's something that keeps on giving. Let's put it that way.
Incredible.
So,
that's great.
Yeah. And so the next thing was the DNA. That's even stranger. Here we have the exit vestibule again. Come on up. Here we go. And so this is where the whole thing gets a little funny. This is a telomerase part of mitosis. It's where a single cell, a fertilized egg, creates a second cell, and they separate. And so the cell division process becomes part of the meaning of life. After, and this is really astounding, how the ancient Egyptians may have known about this, 42 iterations of cell division later, a baby is born with about 8.9 trillion cells in its body. 42.
42 cell division.
Did they know this?
Of course they did.
Maybe on some level. I'm not sure they knew cell biology and DNA mechanics, but they certainly must have known something from either a previous civilization that imparted this wisdom, and it was kept in a secret part of the temples, like at Heliopolis, of which Imhotep was a high priest.
Yes.
So this is, which leads me back to this. This is called cargo cult. Back in World War II, the Allies were building airfields on islands in New Guinea, and the natives there found that these airmen were bringing a wealth of goods and food and whatever in airplanes. So a cult developed after World War II, where they built effigies of airplanes. This young lad in the middle has a pair of goggles. You see a set of headphones made out of coconut shells, and they're waiting for the gods to return and deliver the goods. And then you have these men parading around in pseudo rifles with fixed bayonets, with USA painted on their chests. It's part of their ritual of inviting the gods back to give them the prosperity that they enjoyed during the war.
Are these the same people who thought Prince Philip was a god?
I don't know. That maybe I can't say that, but this is in Melanesia, in part of New Guinea. They going back to the Shesu Hor, the people of the realized man. If this civilization did exist, and there's records of it, one of which is maybe part of this called the Palmero stone, and other papyri and parts of this stone are in other museums. They relate a story about these people who were lived about 30 to 36,000 years prior to the first predynastic period. These people were thought to impart all sorts of knowledge and wisdom, which is entirely possible. So possibly this entire wisdom about DNA and genetics came from this race of beings called the Shesu Hor, or the followers of Horus is one translation, which is probably inaccurate, but the followers of or the people of the realized man, which is integrating the heart and the mind into a single thing. One without the other is incomplete.
Exactly.
And I'm trying
They
to
also
find
call them the demigods. So they're basically gods on earth. It's that same concept.
Yeah. Oh, here it is. This is a representation of the DNA. Because there are 22 base pairs, which are the same in both male and female, which is analogous to the 22 pairs of columns in the entrance hall.
Mhm.
But I couldn't figure out, I knew there's something to do with DNA because of the telomerase depictions of the double columns in the exit vestibule. But it turns out those 4 columns represent the XX of the female and XY of the male. So the entire structure of human DNA is also built into the south entrance hall. So you have the human spine, 42 is the number of the gods, or relates to the gods. You have the 42 nomes of the civil government of Egypt. You have the 23 pairs of chromosomes in DNA. I mean, 4 different things going on simultaneously.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that, this may be a coincidence, but after a while, no, it can't be. It just fits too much.
And I often think, Steve, about the thousands of people that go through this site on a daily, weekly basis and have no idea that they're walking through these incredible structures that embody so much knowledge. It's mind-boggling. And it's so wonderful that you're bringing this forward. And we're all working together to bring this forward because it changes the way you experience the sites.
Right, exactly. And I'm thinking also the average Egyptian back then probably didn't know it either. Is kind of like a hidden secret.
Well, not maybe in dynastic times, but
well, maybe. But I'm thinking that the stories that take on a mythological event, the story of Isis and Osiris and Set and fighting.
Well, that's what Hakim called the game of the priests. They interpret it as, a dogma in which they begin to gain control.
Exactly.
And that's sort of like when we fall further into left brain consciousness and we begin to see ourselves as separate from each other. Separation consciousness, that's the warrior archetype. So it all sort of makes sense that, suddenly we're not this wonderful unified. Hakim used to say 42 tribes even. So 42 gnomes, 42 tribes. This is, the separation. It's even the Tower of Babel story. We divide up into these 42 tribes with 42 different dialects, the whole idea. And we lose touch with that unified consciousness, that centered, heart-centered self.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there is a whole lot going on. So I just wanted to touch on the DNA part of it. If you wanted to go further on.
Well, definitely, we got to keep going.
There is a lot going on here.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Let me think here. One other thing that this is a new illustration, which is in the new edition. Here.
Quickly, when does this new edition come out?
I am due to get my copies this week. It'll be available for sale on my website, stevekallman.com, probably at the end of this week, and available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other websites in late November.
Great.
But you can still order.
Same book, but it has more information.
And it's bigger.
I bet.
Yeah, I reorganized a lot of things. I switched things around. I believe, and I know in my heart of hearts that it's a far better written. It's really the book I should have written, but I was in a hurry to get things out, and I was having too much.
Hakim said the time for writing books was over, but the books do help.
Now you tell me.
Our eyes. But the books do open our eyes, and you had to get that out to begin the process, and then you just continue. I can't seem to get the information that I've been researching and gathering in any kind of linear format, just because of all the things we've been talking about. The information is not linear. Look at us going around all these photographs. I try and put your photographs in a linear format, and it doesn't work when you're trying to talk.
Well, did the ancient Egyptians think linearly?
No, I don't think so.
We're channeling our inner Egyptian here.
That's right.
Right. This is what I believe the original step pyramid or enclosure looked like before there was a step pyramid. So you can tell it was considerably smaller. To the bottom, we have the original entrance gate, which is now a false gate. And here we have the exit gate, which is now false gate 13. And right here is where that self-closing door is. I don't know if you can. I don't know if I can highlight that. But then this is all part of the structure of the first iteration of the mortuary complex before there was a pyramid built. This is the three mastabas that were originally part of it. So just to give you an idea, it was really kind of a small thing until it just ballooned up. So did you want to continue on, and I can show other stuff later on?
Cool. Alan, can you put mine back up?
Yep. There we are.
When you see it.
Okay, yours is up, Patricia.
All right, let's move on. Here we have our crowns.
Yes. So the white crown is the crown for Upper Egypt. The red crown represents Lower Egypt, and the two together is the unified crown, which hints or is symbolic of a realized person. The white crown is the pericardium, okay, and has nothing to do with big-headed extraterrestrials. Sorry, folks, but it has to do with the heart and the pericardium. And the red crown, I believe, has to do with the rib cage and part of the spine leading up to the skull. Okay, so it represents the skull with that little curly thing that comes off the crown. I think is representing the third eye, or points to the third eye, or the energy of the third eye. It has other analogies in nature. The spiral is in ancient hieroglyphs means 100. It could mean may you live to be 100 years old. Who knows? And then other spirals are natural, like hurricanes, the Milky Way galaxy, the center of a daisy, for example, has a spiral context to it.
They also call it as the breath. They had a game they called a game that actually spiraled in and out again, the serpent game.
Mehen.
Yeah, the Mehen game. So yeah, there's so many different things. But go ahead, continue. I was sorry. There was a bit of hesitation.
Okay, well, the double crown essentially relates to the pharaoh having become a realized man, or Horus. So the translation of followers of Horus may be inaccurate, but at some point Horus became a god associated with royalty. So it all really does tie together.
It does. In later mythologies, Horus is the ascended form of Osiris. Osiris is basically on what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey. And when he actually finds, gets to the end, he dies and is resurrected to become his son, S-O-N, S-U-N, whatever, the new cycle of the sun, the ascended Horus, who, is that ascended being or realized being. So again, exactly the same thing. And I do want to point out that Hakim said that the white crown was the thymus and the red crown was the womb. And I also see the two crowns as the two hemispheres of the brain. So again, many different ways to look at it that has the same basic of what you're presenting.
If you look at the crown that Osiris wore, it's basically a white crown with two ostrich feathers.
Mm-hmm,
if you take a look at this depiction of the pericardium and the thymus is actually at the top of the pericardium, which is where those feathers are usually located on the
exactly.
Image of Osiris. Now, thymus is known as the protector of the endocrine system, the chief gland that launches T cells to defend the body against invasion, infection, disease, whatever. And that's the role of Pharaoh, in a sense. He's the protector of the people of Egypt. And so Osiris was at one point a king.
He's like the white blood cell in the system of the body that is Egypt.
Yeah.
Well, also, you said the endocrine system, and that's the chakras. So there you have Upper and Lower Egypt as the chakras, that the entrance that we just saw, it's all these aspects that come into harmony in order for us to become the
same. So the crowns and a lot of other things from ancient Egypt relate to bodies, body parts, the human body, and it's so prevalent in the step pyramid enclosure. It's repeated over and over again.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. And here I have your mitosis process with the...
right. That's kind of what led me to just looking at the way the four columns look like a mitosis.
Yes.
Yeah. What the hey? This can't be coincidence.
No. And I love the way your mind works.
Well, Patricia, when we're talking about duality and splitting, this just makes me think of how you've always talked about the age of Gemini after the age of Cancer falling into form.
Yeah.
The age of Gemini where we split into duality, masculine, feminine.
Exactly. The ages and our symbols for them as we precess through the precession of equinoxes, those ages do show us this path of us falling into form. Because you have Cancer, which is basically the yin and the yang in the containment. So that's, still unity consciousness. Gemini is that great split between the masculine and the feminine with Shu and Tefnut as the twins. And then you just keep falling into Taurus, which is the big black hole represented on the ceiling at Dendera. And that's when we literally 6,000 years ago, this is when the systemization of mankind began, and that's where they say civilization began because the system began 6,000 years ago, and then we devolved to where we are now. And this is how we're around the circumpolar stars. The axis of the Earth is literally following that path, and we're at Polaris now, which is the greatest amount of separation that we can be in polarity. So I'm introducing the Heb Sed court here, and Hakim always said it was all about all of the temples and sites were all about sound, light, and running water. So I know that we're going to talk about sound here and frequency. And I have this image of Ma'at representing harmonic resonance, which Hakim said this was a sound healing or frequency healing hospital, as we've already discussed. And here I have this image of the Jed pillar and this raising of the Jed, but these are images that all speak to the Heb Sed festival.
Can you tell us quickly what the Heb Sed festival is?
Well, they call it the Festival of the Tail. The Sed is representing, they believe, Whippawat being the tail. And Whippawat is basically the one that brings us back into form, I believe. He's sort of like the duality of Anubis. But that's a whole other story. But this is where the pharaoh goes through all of these rituals at his 30th year of rulership. So the whole idea is, and this speaks to the stages of the sun, the cycles of the sun, because they talk about the sun getting old and tired. So this is the thought that the king, after 30 years of rulership, is getting old and tired. The kingdom is falling out of Ma'at, so he needs to unify the two, Upper and Lower Egypt, in order to prove that he has the right to rule. But he goes through this resurrection ritual, which I believe at different points throughout Egyptian history, and we're talking thousands of years, you know, at one point they go through the rituals physically, and eventually it becomes symbolic. And that's what we see, you know, at the Temple of Abydos, the symbolic, you know, the king Seti I coming from a military background, proving that he has the right to rule because he doesn't have the bloodline, because he goes through this symbolic ritual, but he doesn't actually go through the, the near death and that whole experience of it. And it changes as you go further and further. But the idea is he has to prove that he's fit to rule. And so he does this running of the labyrinth, the running with the bulls. We could talk for hours about that. And then he does all these rituals and has his resurrection ritual, comes back, the opening of the mouth ceremony, and he is crowned, as we said, a Horus king. You can see an image for that. You see that the upper left-hand corner, you see the pharaoh with the white crown and the red crown back to back. And this is this, crowning scene. And you have, the two standards, one with Set and one with the hawk of Horus, representing the duality of self. So in a way, it's showing you he's transmuting his duality. You have the winged sun disk on top, which is Horus. It's actually a representative of Horus Vedeti, his highest state of being at Un, which represented that moment of silence when you come into perfect harmonic resonance. But let's not spend too much time on this. This is all about ancient ritual embodying these principles as well. And the raising of the Jed, I know Steve can talk about this. When you see it at Abydos, the Jed is literally 23.5 degree angle, which is the tilt of the earth, give or take. And they did this annually as well, to show this cyclical, eternal cycling back to balance, and then the Jed falling again, form and formless realities. Want to add something, Steve?
No, but if you look at the image on the right, where you have Djoser running the Heb Sed, you can see the tail against his leg on the right side there. That's a tail of a bull.
That's right.
Those two sets of three semicircular devices, or what they were pillars, semi-pillars that were in the Great South Court, and he would run around that course. There's only two of them, or four altogether. So why they didn't build three, I don't know. But anyway, this image is actually from chamber in the South Tomb, and I think it's replicated to some extent in underneath the step pyramid itself. But also right above the those semicircular boundary markers, you'll see a circle with a line underneath. That is the Shen, and it symbolizes completion of a circuit. And so when Pharaoh completes the circuit around these boundary markers, he, in a sense, renews his right to rule.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Oh, I did get that right.
All the things we've been talking about. What's fascinating is it's embodied in the structure as well as in the symbolism and mythology.
Right.
So
Now, this is interesting. This, to me, I created this image on the left. I got some software and from a 3D warehouse anyway, and I created these little awnings over a couple of the east chapels, which I felt were used for client or patient use. The forecourt, or there's in two parts. You can see in the let's say the lower left-hand corner, there's a forecourt antechamber, and then behind it is what I think was the bed chamber. What you see on the right are from the west chapels on the other side of the courtyard. Interesting thing is there are 12 of these patient suites, what I call. Egyptologists say these are chapels for worshiping gods, but there's 12 of them, and that's the weird thing. In Egypt at that time, back in the third dynasty, they acknowledged the Ennead, or the 9 chief gods. So that leaves 3 more chapels for who? Raleigh, Ptah, Sekhmet, and their son, I forget his name, not Khonsu, maybe Khonsu, I don't know.
Never
So that could be it.
it could also represent the 12 ages, or the 12 hours in a day. There's so many.
That's one interpretation, and most of the other it would be the 12 hours of like sunrise. And on the other side of the court, on the west side, would be the 12 hours of the sunset. But interesting thing is, in order to get here, you have to go through an entrance from the entrance hall, which is at the position of L3 vertebra. Now, right above, right at L3 is where the spinal cord exits the spine and joins up with the sympathetic nervous system. So somehow the L3 doorway relates to the nervous system. And since there are 12 of these chapels or patient suites, it relates to the 12 cranial nerves. Actually, there's 12 pairs. There's 12 on the east side and 12 on the north side.
Wow.
So that also is another layer, and also another quasi proof that it was a medical center. So this picture on the left just shows you how the east chapels or patient suites were used. You see a frame right at it. Part of it is how the frame would have just sat on top of the structure, and it's you take the frame off and let the sunlight bathe the patient inside, which is a viable source of vitamin D. Plus, sunlight is an antiseptic. It helps cleanse part of that. And
so is this how you envision it, or have you seen information that says this is the way it was?
This is how I envisioned it. Now, there's also a little niche behind the patient suite. If you see the different chapels have the sort of a curved shape to the top of them. Between them is a kind of a small room, which I think was used for a latrine chair. It's basically the patient's bathroom. It's crazy, but it also could be used to house either a clay pot with an open face, or maybe a brazier for harboring.
Are you talking about this area, this little niche?
No. There's similar ones that were in the east chapels. You're looking at the west chapels.
Okay.
let me just grab a hold of a picture that can basically show that. Where did it go? Nope, it's not there. I had it here. While I'm looking for it, these are these chapels over here on the east side of Heb Sed Court. The serpentine look to the chapel itself. Let me just briefly show this. If you can bring up my
Okay.
yeah, right there. Just okay. This shows the serpentine walls, and then you have here what I say is a latrine and then this little cubicle here, which is about head high above the floor. You would have had either incense burning or a candle or some sort of little
oil. They might have been the oils. They use a lot of aromatherapy.
Yeah, aromatherapy. But this is for the use of the patient who would be in this area here, and perhaps a family member would be stationed here who would help with their relative in whatever process is going on. Over here, I think, is what we call a nurse's station, where priests would come and help deal with the various patients that they had. Interesting thing is, it looks very similar to the folds and curvature of the human brain. See how it's all kind of curves around, and here it resembles the East Chapel. So going further, here is the East Chapel that's been rebuilt. One of partially it, but you can see right here is a niche above the floor, and this is all open to the sky. And if I got this is what they would look like. So interesting thing about Egypt is the wind, the prevailing winds go from the north to the south. And people would try to build their latrine room with a window facing north so that it would literally flush out the bad smells, no pun intended. And so these are the chimneys where the brazier or the pot containing igneous rock and some wood or other burnable material would be sitting, and the smoke would go up, and the prevailing winds would push the smoke away. You notice the shape of the chapel itself. It's got a kind of a curve. This reminds me of the wing of an airplane. If you look at an airplane wing from the side, it has a very thick part of the root, and then it tapers back into the edge, the trailing edge of the wing. What happens is this produces a negative pressure on top, causing the wind that's on the bottom of the wing to push the airplane up. So with the prevailing winds going here, there's a negative pressure which actually draws up the smoke or smells out of the East Chapel alcoves, which kind of makes you think, well, did Imhotep know about this? Well, it's pretty obvious now. So he knew about, in some way, the negative pressure produced by a wind going over this curve, like an airplane wing, and inducing a negative pressure which pulls up the smoke, which is probably how most chimneys are built, if you look at it.
It's interesting that you bring that up. We do see things a little differently on what those chambers were used for. Based on what I was taught from Hakim and Stephen Mailer, we see them as those little niches that we sort of pointed out, that was where the physician would put his head to connect to the patient who would be on the patient's table. Because this was given to me, my understanding from Hakim. So it's a little different. I just want to point that out because we talk about it all the time.
Well, I think the West chapels were used mostly for that particular healing ritual. Okay.
And it's possible. We're all theorizing, and Hakim is the first one to say prove me wrong. He did what we're doing.
Yeah.
Not always, but sometimes he did, and he said, "I'm not always right." So I just wanted to point out that sometimes we see things a little differently. But I love the points that you're bringing in make sense for my understanding as well as for yours. So.
Yeah, this is what these East chapels look like nowadays. Here you have the antechamber leading out, and you go in here. A little bed-like cot would be here, and this is about 5 feet wide, so there's plenty of space. And then behind it are these niches right here.
Mm-hmm.
So this would be the bed chamber here. Here is the antechamber.
This is okay. All right. Yeah.
Now, this is the same illustration we saw before, and these are latrine chairs, which would be, I believe, put in there. Okay, these are examples from, I think, Thebes, if I'm not mistaken. And then here is a chamber. This is actually in the West chapels.
Right.
But here you see a recessed cubicle, the false doors on either side, and here's a door hinge.
Right.
Here's a niche with a sloped ceiling. Here's what it's actually a curved slope ceiling. This is from I think the South Pavilion, but it would probably be the same thing.
Let me really quickly. I just want to. Maybe I'm confused. So you were saying that the west side was used for the physicians.
Yes.
Okay, then we are in agreement. You were been talking.
This is a niche in one of the West chapels.
Right. Yeah. This is where they would put their head in and make that connection.
Right. Exactly. And you can see the sloped nature of this ceiling. It acts like a speaker.
Yeah.
It focuses energy. But also, if this is replicated in the East chapels, you'd have like an incense burner, a little whatever, and maybe a little oil lamp for illumination. And of course, below it would be the latrine chair. And this is a side view of it. So this is the alcove for the patient suite. The niche you can see has a curved ceiling, and this is the recessed cubicle for whatever, the latrine chair itself. And this is the false door gem, and then it's open to the sky. So the smoke would curl up in here and then go out. If it was a flat ceiling, it would have a little bit more difficulty in leaving it collect inside that niche. Another brilliant design by Imhotep. So let's see what I got here. Oh, and then in the Heb Sed court, now here is where you would have probably a patient lying down here. And these are the, let me see if this is a little smaller. No, it's not. Okay. I have to go back here. Anyway, these long rooms are kind of like giant sized versions of the patient suites. And I felt that these were used first for the Heb Sed festival for the servants of the elite who stayed in what became the patient suites. Okay. And later on, when it's a hospital or medical center, these were used for relatives of patients or their servants, or one was for men, one was for women. And the reason I know that is there's a latrine here. There's another one here. Well, this is the one that's in this particular patient suite. And here's another one here. I mean, there's 21 of these latrines all over this complex. Think about it. This is a working hospital, a working temple, if you want to just strip out the idea of a medical center being here. Where do these people do their business, shall we say? I mean, Memphis is like half a mile to the east.
Oh, no, they definitely had to have facilities.
There was a priesthood that lived and worked in this area. I mean, it's kind of like, I keep thinking of a scenario where a family is attending the Heb Sed rituals in the Great South Court, and the little kid said, "Mommy, I have to go. I told you to go before you left." Well, that leads to another area that I think had 3 latrines in that door, near that doorway that goes by the south side of the step pyramid off to the south and north pavilions. Those were latrines. There's like 21 of them in this complex.
That's just an interesting point you're making, that very often when we're theorizing about what these places could have been used for, we completely overlook the human nature of the people who built them. Like,
exactly. We only see ancient Egyptians from the images on temple walls and in their tombs. There's kind of a static image that we can't really relate to, but there were human beings that worked and lived here. Yep. I know it's silly, but that obviously Imhotep provided for the needs of the living as well as the needs of the dead. So there you have it. And the needs of the living was the world's first hospital. Think about that.
Yep.
Oh, relating to the East Chapel's patient suites, this is a picture from the 1918 flu pandemic in Boston. This is in Boston. The patient load was so great that they had to put patients in tents. As you can see, they're lying in the sun. So if you take the lid off, or the canvas roof off of the patient suite, it allows sunlight in, which gives vitamin D, which is also good for boosting your immune system, as well as the antiseptic nature of just sunlight. And they found, oddly enough, that patients who were in these tents and also sitting, they were cured quicker than the ones who were inside the hospital.
Yep, definitely.
So I'm not too far off, I think.
No, we talked about that during the pandemic. Get outside, get vitamin C.
I know. Isn't that, you have to be inside. There in Minnesota, they sent police around telling people to get inside their house or they'd be arrested. You idiots! Don't you know that outside is a better thing?
I went to the beach for the summer just to get, to be healthy.
Yeah, I know. So, but this picture is kind of interesting. This is what I believe Imhotep wanted to build when he added the Heb Sed court and entrance hall section, the quadrant in the lower left. As you can see, there the 4-tier step pyramid was built, and when you have the blue line square on the right side, that was actually the first enclosure. And then he added onto this, but he couldn't build it. If you notice, on the Western Massif II, the storage magazines would have been underneath a west wall. If he had built it, that west wall would eventually collapse and underneath over these little rooms that are underground. So then he basically kept the idea of the entrance hall and et cetera. And then he expanded it, adding 2 more massifs on either side of Western Massif II to prevent anybody from building above them. And that's important. I mean, it looks like it's a very weird design. Western Massif 1 and 3 have flat roofs, whereas Western Massif 2 has a curved roof. And that curved roof is mimicked in the South Tomb. Okay, and so it means that Imhotep may have thought that these storage magazines were really tombs. There are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different shafts which go down into this whole complex of chambers and tunnels. So it could be 5 different tombs, but they haven't really done any excavating or looking into it.
No, they've left it pretty much alone. I'd like to point out, too, here's your boundary markers. And that's simple, like you saw the 3, but there's 2 here. And you can see them right in that Great South Court.
Right. And also, if you look at the South Tomb Chapel, that has the cobra friezes along the perimeter, which means that it was meant for use by the king. And if you go inside there, the very little chamber at the very end, that's a latrine room, and the rest of it is meant for a changing room for the king.
You like your latrines.
I'm sorry. It's just so obvious to me.
Don't be sorry. I love it. I love the attention to detail.
Yeah.
Oh, this I just put in to give them another view of the whole complex and where the Heb Sed is, and the pyramids and everything else we're talking about. I just like to add these to give people a sense or a scope. This is what Hakim called the patience table. There were 11 of them, maybe 12. Where you see on the lower right-hand corner is the rubble of one that, they had rubble left over of some of the others, which they've totally cleared away now. So all you see is this flat ground, all of that's gone, and you see this one. And most of the tour guides just point to it and say, this is where the crowning was done, or, the celebration of the king and the queen, or, these kind of things, which, at one point, I'm sure these kind of things happened. And obviously maybe the crowning or the throne, being crowned with the double crown. But Hakim said this was the patience table, and the two sets of stairs, the patient would choose which set to go up, one being the masculine, one being the feminine, positive charge, negative charge. But and then the niches across where the physician would place his head. This is basically what I was given, and that the niches in that western area and the patients' tables are connected by underground channels with running water, according to.
There's evidence for that.
Yeah.
The Latvian scientific mission did ground penetrating radar over this whole area, and they found 3 purported tunnels going from the dry moat or the great ditch that goes around the entire perimeter, and they go to 3 of the underground pit tombs that's underneath the step pyramid. So there may have been more, and they traverse from outside underneath the Heb Sed court to the step pyramid. In fact, there's another tunnel going from the south tomb to the step pyramid chambers underneath near the burial chamber. I don't know if they're ever going to dig that one out, but that's kind of curious as why it's like that. But I think it has to do with
complex, not necessarily this court, but that Hakim went down into a shaft, into a well shaft, and he went through a tunnel. He says he ran, he walked, he swam his way all the way to the Giza Plateau when he was about 9 to 11 years old.
From Saqqara?
From Saqqara. He used to tell that story all the time. So yeah, he was, and I've been down underneath the Giza Plateau, and I've been down 3 levels and looked down to a 4th. There is so much under the ground that the public is not aware of. I always laugh and say, the tour buses come in, everybody gets out and they look up at the pyramids, and they're unaware that they're standing on top of an incredibly huge complex underneath their feet.
Is that complex or that tunnel or whatever underneath the Giza Plateau, is that what they call the Tomb of Osiris?
No, that's just one. That tomb is right along the causeway in between the Middle Pyramid and the Valley Temple. But no, the whole complex is underneath. There are shafts and chambers and areas. I've been in different parts and been down in some of these areas. And it's just incredible. And yes, tunnels underneath there. But, they talk about a tunnel from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid, but there's just, again, it's talk. We've seen and heard stories of people going down. But like I said, I have been down 3 levels and looked down to a 4th. And I've heard the locals say there are at least 7, which in a way makes sense.
Where did you actually access this underground area?
Well, I've been in some areas, but the one that I really went down to the 3 levels was near Kentic House.
Where was that again?
Kentic House. It's one of the old early dynastic queens, but it's basically to the south of the Sphinx, like beyond, you go, just keep walking.
I think it's kind of like
it looks like an outcropping near there that some people relate to another Sphinx, but yeah, I'm sure you know where it is.
Yeah, Kent Gowes, I think it was a mastaba like thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, the guy, when I first got here, I used to spend all my time up there, and Yosef and I would walk around and research and study and go everywhere. So we would go down, and the keepers just, they just pick up the fences and say go. So we got to really explore and have a lot of fun here too. I was just so fortunate. You've got to get back, Steve. You'd be amazed how much is
yes, I do.
And how much restored. And to get to the places you haven't been, I think it's going to open a whole new world to you.
Another edition in the coming.
Exactly, maybe many. I want to ask you too. Let's get to the niches. Did you ever put your head in one of these niches?
I don't remember. I remember.
This is something we do with our groups when we lead tours. You put your head inside, and it's amazing because you can. I don't like to tell people this ahead of time, but it is so incredible. This is what Stephen Mailer did on my first.
I remember now. Back in '88 and 1990, they had the West Chapels kind of roped off. There was a little wire fence in front of them, so you really couldn't go back in there.
And you have to be careful today. It's not always okay, but most of the time they know what we're doing. We're not, it's literally we're looking at something that's technically dynamic. It's amazing, and what you actually hear, you can hear the pulse. When I did it the first time, I wasn't given any information. I was just told to go back and put my head in the niche. And I got upset because I thought there was a motorcycle going by outside or maybe a plane flying too low. And I came out and there wasn't anything. And what I was hearing was this connection with the earth. So, it's almost like you're hearing the heartbeat of the earth. Alan, you put your head in. What did you experience?
A bunch of thoughts come rushing at you, colors and sounds. And
Really?
Yeah. Well, I've actually practiced with using it as a healing center, and we've had our guests, who might have ailments, get on the patients' tables, and we put our heads in, and I tell the guests, to the ones that are putting their heads in the niches, to just see what they see, hear what they hear. You might hear it. The first time I did it, I actually saw the energetic matrix of this woman. I had just been to the Red Pyramid, which is very high. You have to climb high and then go down really low to go into the pyramid. And she had a bad leg. And I had helped her up. She was on my arm the whole way up and the whole way down. And so she went up. And afterwards, when, we had put our heads in the niches and sent the healing energy, she was walking the rest of the tour with no problems. Climbing.
Wow.
I've had this experience with many people, and I don't want to waste a lot of time here, but it's really amazing because when I do this with my guests and we come out and we share what we've seen with our, the patient, whoever that may be, we're all sharing similar images. I often see, some of the wounds that they get when they're children, and I can tell them what they experienced, and this is the beginning of their falling into this disease. Because you're in a state of imbalance because of these old wounds. So it really speaks to the healing process, which I think is fascinating.
Interesting. I'd like to go back there with a sound generator. I can choose whichever frequency I want, from
there you go
to several hundred, and see which one produces a better resonant value, like 432 hertz instead of 440. Or 582 is another healing, supposedly a healing, and just to see what happens. Of course, in my heart of hearts, I hope you hit the right frequency and this magic door opens up and
I've had some experiences. I've witnessed several healings, major healings, and I've had some experience with that as well. But they also, and we'll talk about this, later, but there's, in the other courtyard, there is anyway, there's another area where they go in and they're able to see their imbalance within. So they understood that it's not about this magic sudden healing, that, there is an interactive process with the patient, and he has to do the work afterwards to bring himself back into balance, or the ailment, whatever it is, will come back, and sometimes in spades. So, and that's how healing works. You can get a spontaneous healing. There's many, people are going to healers and getting these great experiences, but unless they change what's out of balance within.
I'm readily aware of that. When I experienced prostate cancer, not only did I have a very good surgeon, but I also worked with intuitives to come up with the root psychological source of the disease itself. So you have to have both a physical healing and an emotional, psychological healing. Otherwise, it comes back.
Yeah.
And my wife has had breast cancer 4 times, and every time she gets it, she goes through the same thing, talking to her healing practitioners as well as medical profession, and you have to do both. You can't, allopathic may be limited, but what it does very well. So.
Yeah, I agree. There is, we go to all our resources, but we do also have to go within and figure out how that, whatever it is that's causing the disease, how that's serving us. Because whatever it is, we're still doing it. So it's got to be serving us in some way. Are we willing to release that? Are we willing to give that up?
Exactly. Sometimes it's easier to have surgery than it is to confront our demons.
Exactly. Well, I don't know about that. If we really knew what we were putting ourselves through.
Yeah. Well,
we want it now.
As I used to say, unless you're willing to confront your demons, you will never see your angels.
Beautiful. I love that.
So
I also wanted to point out the corbelled ceiling right before these niches. If you look up right before the niche too, there is this corbelling again for that sound effect. And also up in the upper left-hand corner here, I was told by a sound engineer that those little things on the wall, those neat little protrusions, he said that he was familiar with that design for pulling sound around corners. And that's
it helps sound production. If you go to my alternate screen there, it shows the same I call them tethering posts. It's kind of a cute idea, and here's the same tethering post you saw before, but they resemble organ pipes.
Right. That was my first thought when I saw them.
Yeah. So, but I think one of the other things I saw is it reminded me of belaying pins on a sailing ship, which are used to tie off rope for managing the sails on a sailing ship.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And
so there was a giant canvas or linen.
There could have been, but here's the thing about it. Let me see, back here, oops, this is part of that. If you go to, I'm trying to get a picture of the Heb Sed court. You even had that back there, the Heb Sed court niches. I got it here. Let's see. This is a good view of it. These stairways that go up, just as an aside, the general Egyptology explanation for the buildings that are here are that they're replicas of the king's palace, which doesn't really jive with our notions of what a king's palace is. However, if you look at, say, this niche here, there's a stairway going up. My wife was born in Greece. She was raised there, came to this country in the early 1960s. Her family had a horse and a cow with its calf. Those animals were stabled on the ground floor, like so, around here, and they lived on the second floor. Now, if we go back and look at those, what I call tethering posts, let's go back here. It's easy to find. Let's see. Let's see. Back here. Heb Sed Court. Heb Sed Court. Anyway, I have too many illustrations.
Oh, I saw them. They were toward the bottom there. Because I knew you had them in the book. That's why I found mine. There they are.
They're there. So these, if you have animals stabled on the ground floor, and you would have a manger in front of these posts in a real setting where the animals would feed or be housed. If you notice, they're smaller at the bottom than they are at the top. Let's say you have a rope around the neck of, say, a cow, okay? And you tie the rope fairly loose here so that the diameter is approximately this width, but it's narrower than this. So the cow can still move its head up and down without choking it. But he still stays tethered to the post. I know it sounds nuts, but it just shows the ingenuity of the ancient Egyptians to me.
Well, yeah.
So it could, on a healing level, yeah, they could act as resonators, where if the person is lying on a table or just with their head right next to those resonators act as amplifiers in a sense, the way the cone-shaped reed organ pipe looks like these.
Yeah.
So it all fits. It's all, it's not necessarily one or the other. I mean, we are taught in our linear thinking that it has to be this explanation or it has to be that explanation. But in actuality, it's all of these.
Exactly.
At different times.
I so agree with you on that. So much. That we're so caught up in trying to interpret all of these things with our left brain thinking, and we leave out so much.
Yes, exactly.
Opening our minds.
Yeah, I'm just small things like this. Most Egyptologists is just a decoration on the side of a wall. Who cares what it is? It's a picket fence. Okay, why would you have a picket fence inside a wall?
Exactly.
Really? So some explanations just don't wash.
Well, and yeah, you need to have first of all, you see patterns like we've talked about, but also an inquisitive mind who really wants to know.
Yeah.
And when you've seen what we've just seen with the southern entrance and what that embodies and represents, it's beyond, it's beyond anything anybody's thought of. Not anybody, but so many. And then you go through the rest of the complex and you know it's there. You know it's there. Something that's beyond what we've thought about, that's been written about. So
this just is a little taste of the sacred geometry that is used to design this. This is an 8x16 square grid, which is a root 5 rectangle, root 5. And so starting with the right-hand corner, this is the open door. Here's the other open door. This goes to the main entrance hall, So if you notice, these particular rectangles and the arcs that are created by them land at specific points. Like in this case, it's this wall, and then this one ends at this wall, and then this green arc ends at the center, and other things. But you'll notice one other thing. The numbers here, 1, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17 are all prime numbers.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Not only did they have Fibonacci ratios built into this, somehow I think they were also working with prime numbers, which are, short definition is, a number is the sum of two numbers that are adjacent to each other, like 3 + 4 is 7. 7 plus 8 is 15, which isn't shown, but it's there. So there's also 17 bundles in the
reeds, the bundles of
reeds.
reeds. Yeah.
There's 19 bundles in the exit vestibule,
Right.
which is also a prime number.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. These are the things that keep me awake at night too.
I know what I went through for 2.5, 3 years.
Exactly.
Oh boy. Yeah.
It's been since I moved here, and I'm going on 16 years now. So yeah, I know of what you speak.
Yeah, things just keep unfolding. You know, it's like we know Imhotep was deified as a god, or as the patron of physicians and such, and the Mamisi, or birthing center, was part of his design. And there's like a whole maternity wing here. We have the birthing rooms, postnatal recovery room, and I know that because there's what, a latrine in the room for mother and child, and then the family waiting room, and then exam room, whatever. So I feel like ever see the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
You bet.
Yeah, and Richard Dreyfuss is eating dinner with his family after being contacted by the aliens, and he's dishing out mashed potatoes, and suddenly something triggers him, and he's trying to sculpt it into the mountain, and he's saying, "This means something." Well, that's what I was looking at when I was looking at the plans for the temple. It's like, this means something, and things just kept unraveling. And I was lucky, I admit. Fortunately, I was not a.
I don't call it luck, Steve. I think this is, you were meant to come here and do this. You know, you weren't here as long as I was, and look how much. I mean, you went back and you were so passionate about it. I was so passionate, I had to come back to Egypt and live here. And it was the same for me. I knew there was so much more, and I had to find out why Hakim said some of the things he said, and he never explained it. You know, and I spent time and years just trying to figure out why he said the Sphinx was Tefnut and all of these things. And it's amazing how everything just unfolds in front of you. And now I walk through the temples and I see where Hakim learned all the different things. And, that comes from spending time doing the research, trying to figure it out. Right. So I applaud you. And I am gonna stop us here, or we're just gonna keep going on for hours and hours. Yeah. We will continue this conversation because it's been fabulous. Yeah. We did the same thing when we got together for a chat. We could have spoken all day.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Just one last thing. Imhotep was deified as a god. So was his mother.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I'm thinking that this Mamisi is kind of like a dedication to his mother, because it's meant for, as you can see, there's 13 major wall sections, and then there's another one that has 28, which is the feminine cycle and the lunar cycle. But I think she also was a physician. Mm-hmm. She was deified, as was her son was deified because he was a skilled physician. I think that's why his mother was deified as well.
Well, he probably, growing up with her as his mother, this is where it begins.
Yeah. He inherited his father's profession of architect. So why would he, inherit his mother's profession as physician?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing, at the other temples throughout Egypt, the Mamisi is also a place where they show the deification of the kings through this birth, being born from divinity. So there's that aspect of the same thing we've been talking about. You see that?
It's also part of the Heb Sed ritual, in which he's covered
exactly.
in a gown. It imitates the placenta.
So it's weaving it all together, and this continues throughout, dynastic Egypt. They change the stories, they change the mythologies, change the icons, change, but it's always the same underlying story about this great red flood. Okay, we're going to end on that beautiful note. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Shared.
Let's get together and we'll talk more about this stuff.
And again, I'd love to have you come to Egypt and we could spend some time.
I'd love to go. I'll have to get my passport renewed.
Well, no time like the present, Steve.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.